since 2003, this is the Sports Source. East Tennessee's #1 sports talk show.
Presented by Pipe Wrench, and by Junk Be Gone, and by the Garza Law Firm.
With your host, John Pennington. The Sports Source starts now.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome into the Sports Source here in our Junk Be Gone studios. We got a packed show for you today, and I'm glad to say we've got the full house in here. If you're thinking about getting on I-40 East anytime soon, don't. We basically had guys sprinting out of the parking lot to barely make it in here on time because I-40 East is apparently a parking lot. But we're glad that all of our gang was able to fight off the traffic and get in here. They will be talking to you about Tennessee's status as an SEC East contender this year. Are they a legitimate challenger to Georgia? Or is anybody going to be a challenger to Georgia? We'll discuss that. We'll talk about football recruiting. We'll talk about baseball transfer portal, which is that's a revolving door at this point. David Ubben have an interesting piece about could Saudi cash, it's buying up golf, could that be soon buying up college football? He spoke to some administrators around the country. We'll tell you what they said. It's an interesting show packed for you. We'll also talk a little bit about Nikki McCray-Penson at the end of the show. So let's get right into it. First segment of today's broadcast is brought to you by our friends at Junk Be Gone. And I need to thank you folks because so many of you have taken my advice and called these people. You've used Junk Be Gone. I use them, and it makes house cleaning or preparing for a move so easy. Do it yourself or have them do the lifting. Either way, they haul everything in that dumpster away. It's clean and easy, and I hear that WATE just cleared out a huge area of the station using Junk Be Gone. If we can all use them, you can use them, and you should. JunkBeGone.biz to learn more about that fine local company. All right, let me introduce 4 fine local guys who are on the show today. We got one more waiting in the wings. He's not so fine, but he'll be here as well. Right over here, we got Vince Farrar from 99.1 The Sports Animal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Callahan from GoVols247.com. Thank you. David Ubben from The Athletic. Thank you. And right there from 99.1 The Sports Animal, Will West. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. Veteran football prognosticator and magazine publisher Phil Steele was on 99.1 this week with Josh Ward and Jason Swain, and he talked up the Vols pretty much. Let's take a look at what he said here. He called them legitimate contenders. Remember, in last year's magazine, I forecasted Tennessee was going to have 45 points per game. And what'd they do? 46 points per game, even topped my prediction. First 11-win season since 2001. What a great year. And I don't think it slows down. I think you're going to see Tennessee. They are the legitimate contender to Georgia in the SEC East this year. Well, that sounds great. And then his magazine came out this week, and he has Tennessee at number 14. He ranked them behind number 1 Georgia, number 4 Alabama, number 11 LSU, and he says, and skip down there to the bottom, he talks about how good Hendon Hooker was in the offense with Hooker, but he said, but Hooker's in the NFL now, and Heupel is turning to Joe Milton at quarterback with former 5-star recruit Nico Iamaleava waiting in the wings. The Volunteers should be one of the better teams in the SEC East again in 2023, but with a new quarterback and some defensive holes to be filled, Tennessee could take a half step back from where it was in 2022. Even still, that could be comfortable. That would comfortably have the Vols among the top 25 teams in America. Okay, so he's covered his bases. Basically, they are the legit contender against Georgia in the East, but with all the stuff that's changed, they could really take a half step back. Okay, so here's my question for you guys. Is Tennessee, Ryan, I'll start with you, is Tennessee a legitimate contender in the East, or is it still Georgia, drop off, then Tennessee and the other teams? Is Tennessee a legit contender?
It depends on how you define contender, obviously.
Yep.
But
or legit.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say Tennessee is a legitimate contender because you look at the schedule and you can
let's
easily
do that. Let's put the schedule.
You could easily see Tennessee going into the final 2 games of the regular season with, depending on how it goes, maybe even undefeated, but even 1 loss realistically, just a loss to Alabama. And you played Georgia the final next to last week of the regular season, so Tennessee could be going into that game 9-1 with a chance to win the SEC East. How can you not be a contender? And you've got Georgia on your home field. I mean, it might end up being that there's a sizable gap between Georgia and Tennessee, but I don't think we know enough right now to say for sure. And I think Tennessee, from what we saw last year, there's a reason to think they could at least be a legitimate threat to Georgia if they've improved some on defense, which I think they actually have.
Do you think they'll be 9-1 going into that game, though?
If I had to guess right now, no. But I think that's a very real possibility.
Okay, possibility, yes. All right. Legitimate contender in the East, or is that pushing it a little bit? Gentlemen, who wants it?
I think they can be a legitimate contender in the East, right? I don't know that they will be, but they can be. It's on the table. How far has Joe Milton developed? Joe Milton's a guy that has the physical talent to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Now, where on the continuum from the Pittsburgh game 2 years ago to the Orange Bowl with Clemson, where is Joe Milton? I don't know what the answer is necessarily going to be there, but I think Milton, healthy secondary and improved secondary, having actual bodies at the linebacker position, I think is going to help out as well. They can get there. The problem with Georgia, too, though, is they don't play a team that I think wins 8 games this season until November 11th.
Right.
So you're virtually going to have to be perfect outside of maybe the Alabama game heading into that November 18th matchup with the Dogs.
Let's put the schedule back up, because if we can, I think their schedule looks, you just hinted at, it looks easier than Tennessee's. I mean, You've got Florida on the road, they've got Florida in Jacksonville, so they always play in that neutral site there. But they're at Auburn, they're not at Alabama, they're at Vanderbilt, whereas you're at Kentucky. They don't have another road game in the SEC because that Florida is a neutral site, so this year it gives them only 3 road games. You're at Missouri. They're not. I just think, and Missouri gave them trouble last year. I just think when you look at the schedule and take that into consideration, if I made this a binary choice and we're taking they can be a contender out, because I agree, they can be a contender. But if you're just making it binary, will they be or will they not be? That's a different question.
Yeah.
So, and I would say they won't be just because I think the schedule's set up against them. I think Georgia has more talent.
I mean,
Dave.
I think you guys are sleeping on A&M and Kentucky, and there's the South Carolina team.
I'm not sleeping on them yet.
Well, I think yes. Yeah. I think if they get there, they're 9-1 playing Georgia. They're not going to shock anybody. It'll be like, okay, yeah, and it'll be Joe Milton has progressed. That's the.
Yep.
But if they're sitting there at 6-4 necessarily, they wouldn't really shock anybody either because you got a bunch of losable games.
I think it would shock some Vol fans.
Well, shock Vol fans, sure, that's easy to do.
If you said 3 losses, I would say it's not shocking.
But ultimately,
4.
you have a ton of losable games there.
Yeah.
And so I think this team goes as far as Joe Milton will take them. And that's, I think, going to be the story of 2023 for Tennessee football. And so they can get there, but the reality is this team is going to drop 1 or 2 of those games that everybody walks into the season. Oh, we can beat South Carolina. Oh, we can beat Kentucky. We can beat A&M. Yeah, you can, but it's SEC. You got to show up every Saturday, and there's probably a clunker or 2 in there.
Yeah, and there's probably just one team in the league that you can look at and say, what's the one team that's most likely not to have a clunker? Georgia,
yes.
Because their talent is so good they can even overcome a clunker like they did with Missouri last year. Vince, do you think Tennessee's a legit contender, or is that a little too much at this point?
I think for the exercise of the term legitimate,
Yes.
I will say yes because they're the closest team. I think they will be the closest team to Georgia. And honestly, I would be surprised if it's more than 2 games, the difference between the two. And if it's 2 games, and then one of them was the head-to-head Georgia. I mean, late in the season, you were right there with them until that game was played out. That's pretty close to being a contender. So I would define them that, even though I still think there's a gap between Georgia and Tennessee, including the schedule and talent.
What we're going to know this year that we don't know yet is what we're going to find out is whether or not last year was the new baseline, or was last year everything coming together. That was the magic year. You had you stubbed your toe against South Carolina, or it could have really been magical. I'm not saying that you're never going to get higher than that. I just don't know that I'm ready to go, well, your new normal is 10-2, 11-1. You're there every year. It's too soon for me to go there, so I'm going to say not a contender yet. I'll happily admit defeat if I'm incorrect come November. It'd make me. Nobody would be happier than me hosting this television show if Tennessee's still contending late in the season. But I just see it as Georgia's already arrived. You're still trying to arrive. So to me, I don't know that I put anybody as a legitimate. I think Tennessee's the biggest contender, biggest competitor in the East. But I don't know that anybody you would look at it. If Tennessee beats Georgia and wins the East, wouldn't everybody here be kind of surprised?
Yeah. I wouldn't be that surprised, honestly. And the reason why is I don't trust Mike Bobo at all as a play caller.
Okay.
I think that's a definitive step back that they've made going from Todd Monken to Mike Bobo. So because between that and they have lost talent like this 2 years in a row to the NFL draft, I don't think we'll see the step back when it comes to what the record is for Georgia because bought out of the Oklahoma game, schedule's not that difficult.
Forced to get out of the Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's not their fault that they bought out of it, but they had to get out of the Oklahoma game, you're right. But I think Mike Bobo will make them worse. I think replacing a quarterback who was 27 years old almost is going to be a big difference between that and Carson Beck. And so I think that Georgia may not be quite as good as they were last year.
I could see that.
I could see that, yeah.
I was going to say the one problem is you're comparing them to a team that right now is about a 50-50 proposition for winning the SEC East if you look at the or win the SEC if you look at the odds. Last time I looked, so that's the problem is you're comparing a team like Tennessee that has maybe a 1-8 shot at best of winning the SEC to a team that's got about a 50-50 shot of winning the SEC
at worst
by the odds makers.
You would think,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me tell you what's coming up in today's show. We got a lot coming at your way. Vol football recruiting, Ryan's going to break that down for you. Tony Vitello and the portal, Vince will break that down for you. Culture versus talent, that's going to be an interesting little discussion about Georgia and basically carry over to other places. 2023 SEC predictions. Heck, it's mid-July. What better time to skip ahead to December and act like we know what's going to happen? So we'll tell you by December what the biggest storylines in the SEC will have been. Saudi cash and college athletics, they're buying up everything else. What if they came in and said, we want to be the new big booster for Tennessee football? I know you'd like their money, but would you want the rest of it that came with it? We'll discuss that. Nick McCray Pinson passed away. We'll discuss that as well. Lots to come. Coming up next on the Sports Source, when we come back, it sounds like a great offseason for the Tennessee football team. Always sounds great this time of year. Sounds like a great offseason for every team in the country right now. How much should fans be buying into it? Or is it just what everybody says? We'll discuss that. Come on back.